I am opening the February 4th meeting of the Issaquah Transportation Advisory Board. My name is Cynthia Crass. I'm currently the chair of the Transportation Advisory Board. I'm calling this meeting to order. And let's see, do we just go ahead and start with approval of the minutes? I would entertain a motion to, did everyone have an opportunity to review the meeting minutes from our last meeting?
Yes.
Entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
David Wagner, so moved.
Do I have a second?
I second.
Was that Sujata?
Yeah, Sujata.
Great. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Anyone opposed? All right. Minutes are approved. Stephen, do we have anyone who signed up for public comment this evening?
We do not, and I don't see any external phone calls that are calling in for public comment.
Okay, well, hearing none, we'll close public comment and move to the agenda items. The first one on the agenda is the TIP, and it looks like John and Stephen will be presenting on that, so I turn it over to you.
Okay. Hello and welcome. Let me go ahead and get my presentation loaded up.
And as John kind of gets set up for it, I'll just introduce, this is a continuation of the TIP discussion from our last meeting. It's a discussion of the project priorities, the prioritized project list, but also just the initial evaluation of the TIP as we develop it each year, since it's a planning document that has to be developed every year. And this year it'll be part of the larger capital improvement plan. And I believe the timeline is tentatively that council will be considering adoption of the CIP, TIP around May this year, which is a little bit earlier than we usually do. And I'll give it to John.
All right. Thanks, Stephen, for the introduction to that. John Mortensen, Transportation Engineering Manager, and this is part 2 of our TIP work that we're working on. And tonight's presentation, we're going to review what we went over at the January meeting, talk some about what the projects are that we have, and then have a discussion on the priorities from the Transportation Advisory Board's perspective. Also going to talk a little bit about the funding, because that plays a big part in what we can and can't do for the TIP, and then the next steps. To review what we talked about last month, is the city has a lot of plans, and including the mobility master plan, that feed into the comprehensive plan, and then the capital improvement plan, and then the TIP, the Transportation Improvement Program. It's the smallest circle in this figure. It's basically a chapter of the overall capital improvement plan. The capital improvement plan covers everything from our facilities, the city's parks, utilities, and the transportation portion of it. And so as a group, we're going to talk about the transportation part. As I mentioned, I'm going to talk a little bit about the funding. And so this doesn't cover every type of funding that we could potentially have, but this covers most of the types of funding that we have for our projects. And I'll start first with the external funding. And the first one's the Transportation Improvement Board. They have a couple programs. Their biggest one that the city of Issaquah tries to get funding from is the Urban Arterial Program. And that's the program that we use to get funding for East Lake Sammamish Parkway widening and Southeast 62nd. They also have a sidewalk project program and a complete streets program, which during the time I've been with the city, we haven't received funding from either of those programs. The Surface Transportation Program, or STP, those are federal funds that go from FHWA to WashDOT to the city, and we compete for those with grants that we apply for through PSRC. A lot of times these funds are for projects that either serve or connect to the Regional Growth Center. The Regional Growth Center is really the heart of central Issaquah, where the majority of the growth will occur. It's Gilman's in it and Costco, and I don't have the complete boundary here, but it's when you look at our land use planning, it's where the majority of the growth will occur in the future in the city of Issaquah. There's also Congestion Mitigation Air Quality, or CMAQ, and like STP, this is a program where we apply for grants through PSRC, and then if we are awarded, the funds go from FHWA, or Federal Highway Administration, to WashDOT to the city. This program is one where if we were to look for funds, we also would be competing against the transit agencies who have really strong air quality projects, doing things like converting buses from diesel buses to electric buses. But there's also opportunities to get funding for things like adaptive traffic signals to make traffic flow better, or they don't score as well, but there are some pedestrian facility or programs that also can apply for that. One that we didn't include on the list is TAP, or Transportation Alternatives, and there's a number of programs with that. The number one projects that we see out of that, the most common ones are bike and pedestrian ones, but there's other opportunities, and I don't remember all the categories. And TAP funds are what we got design funds for the Newport Way SR 900 to 54th project. Those were TAP funds. And then the Safe Routes to School program is a program that we would apply from WashDOT, and we've considered it for the 2nd Avenue sidewalk project. We didn't get around to it in the last call for projects, but that's one that we would be considering for that project. And then there's also an opportunity to apply for grant funds for bridge projects. Depending on the quality or the sufficiency rating of a bridge, you can get money to replace a bridge or rehabilitate it. And I see a question, Micah. Just a minute here. I'll let you ask your question, and we've got some others. So for the local bridge program, those are federal funds, and we're going to actually this year be updating our bridge load rating calculations, and in order to see if some of our bridges would qualify for bridge funds. And I see there's a couple questions, so I'll pause for questions.
Hi, John, this is Micah. So about the external funding, is there a general strategy that we have as our approach to that? And are there certain funds that we're more likely to be successful? Can you share any information on sort of like we apply to it, but is it we only apply when we're confident we're going to get the grant?
Yeah, so for funding strategy, we really try and identify projects that would fit the criteria of the agency that's going to be awarding the funds. And so, for example, the next one that I'm going to talk about is the National Highway System NHS Asset Management Program. And I'm going to talk about that one because as an example to what you're asking about, because we're actually putting together the grant applications right now. That's a program for highways that or streets that are on the NHS or National Highway System route, and that includes a lot of the major routes in Issaquah, like East Lake Sammamish Parkway, Northwest Sammamish Road, Front Street, Highlands Drive, and some others. And so for that one, first thing we do is we only are going to apply for a route that's on the national highway system. Then the other thing we did is we read the criteria. So for this one, if your pavement condition index, or PCI, that's how pavement's rated, if it scores, and I forget exactly what the right numbers, there was a very specific criteria where your project would score really well if it had a pavement condition index in a certain range. And so if you get outside that range, then your project doesn't score as well. So we looked at the potential candidates and we said, okay, these 3 projects would score well on it and put our efforts to it. And same thing like for the Transportation Improvement Board, we try and meet with our local regional engineer once a year and talk about projects, which ones would be good. And before the pandemic, we'd even take him for a drive and we'd show different ones. And so, for example, we have some projects that we thought would be good for TIB's sidewalk program. And we drove our regional engineer, Greg, around. And Greg, we said, oh, yeah, we think this would be great for the sidewalk program. And he was really quick, like, nope, it's not a good one. And then he explained why. And so then we didn't pursue it. And then, like with the STP program, those are ones that are really geared towards the Regional Growth Center. So we think strategically of what projects that are either in the Regional Growth Center or connect to it would be good to apply for. Does that answer your question, Micah?
Mostly, just kind of one follow on that. So when we apply to it and we're very careful in picking that project, are these grants ones that typically, if you carefully meet that criteria, you're likely to get it, or is it still really a who knows what's going to happen?
I would still say for most projects, you still don't know because it is very competitive. There's only so much funding and there's a lot of agencies out there competing for it. There is also ones like the Southeast 62nd project. That was one that the city knew would be such a great fit for the TIB that it wasn't a matter of whether we would get it, it's how much do we feel comfortable asking for? Because TIB, they have 4 different categories under their urban arterials program, and one of them is growth and development, and the whole scoring criteria is based on how much money the developer's contributing, and with Costco contributing 48% of a $44 million project, it pretty much set the bar and all other projects fell below it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I have a quick question. That was one of my questions. The other one was like, what percentage comes from external sources versus the local, which you're about to talk about?
That's a good question. It really varies from year to year, and it's a little bit skewed if I were to do an average over the last 5 years because we had 62nd, which was unusual. Off the top of my head, I think ideally maybe half, but this is just off the top of my head. I'd have to go back and look, but.
It also kind of depends on the projects as well, because we have large projects where the vast majority of the funding is coming from external versus smaller local projects where we're probably paying half, if not more than that, just to fund the project.
Yeah, and I should clarify, when I was saying half, I was averaging the ones that the city would completely pay for versus the ones grants would pay for. Okay, and then.
Thanks.
See here, did Erica have a question? I thought I saw that pull up on my screen.
Yeah, she was just asking for explanation of who PSRC was.
Oh, that is the Puget Sound Regional Council. Good question. I need to be careful with these acronyms. We have a lot of them. And that is the regional 4-county planning agency. So King County, Snohomish County, Kitsap County, and Pierce County are all part of it. And we coordinate our regional transportation efforts. I believe they do a whole lot more than just transportation, but I only know the transportation part.
You can think of them as our regional governing body who make sure that the cities are following state requirements when it comes to our planning and our grants. And they're also the governing body who distributes any federal funding that comes to our region.
Were there any other questions before I move on?
Can I ask a follow-up?
Absolutely.
What is our representation on the PSRC currently? Is it just the mayor, or how does that work? I've been to a few meetings before, but I just asked this question just in case, like, I don't know. I wasn't familiar with MPOs until like 2 years ago, so I'm not sure who has like a broad knowledge of them or not.
Okay. I'm going to take a chance at answering this, and Stephen, if I miss anything, let me know. Mayor Pauley is on the PSRC's Transportation Policy Board that deals directly with transportation policy. And I believe she's also an alternative for the executive board.
And I believe we have a council member on the growth management committee as well, but I'll need to get back to you on which council member it is.
Okay. I talked a little bit about the National Highway System Asset Management Program. That is a program that does pavement preservation. And so they're looking at projects similar to our pavement management program. And so we're looking at it as a great opportunity to try and supplement the funding that the city's been providing to take care of the city's pavement. Moving on to local funds, number of different sources that we use to fund our projects, either to fully fund them or as match. And the first one is real estate exercise tax. When there's real estate transactions, there is a little tax. The city has some of that money, and then we can use that for, some of it can be used for a wide variety of things like parks projects. Some can be used for transportation projects. And so like on the Newport Way SR 900 to 54th project, we're using REIT or real estate exercise tax for the city's match for our Transportation Alternatives Program grant. When a development comes along that generates new trips, they end up paying a traffic impact fee. And then the traffic impact fees go to a list of our traffic impact fees or concurrency projects. And so an example of that would be the widening of the turn lanes at 12th and SR 900 near the Holiday Inn. That's a project that's eligible for traffic impact fees, as well as the Newport Way Maple to Sunset project. The bicycle and pedestrian mitigation fees is really similar to the traffic impact fees, but it's geared towards bicycle and pedestrian projects. And just like the traffic impact fees, we have a list of these projects that can use these funds, and they're paid by a developer when a development comes along that adds trips. If any of you have driven by Issaquah Middle School and High School, you might have seen the speed camera that's there where the students are in school and you're going, I want to say 27 miles per hour or more, it automatically gives you a ticket, takes the picture and sends it in the mail. Well, the funds for that program go into the school zone safety fund, and those are used for projects like traffic calming and safety type of improvements or pedestrian improvements. And I see we've got a question, so I'll go ahead and, I think it was Jerry, you had a question?
Yes, I was just curious about who decides. So a developer provides the city dollars due to their development. And then you're listing here traffic impact fees and the bicycle and pedestrian medication fees. So you said there's a list of each project. So how do you decide where developer fees are going to traffic? Is it based on their impacts they have to traffic and bicycle and pedestrians? And so it's a project that's just developed due to their development? Or like you said, you had a list. So I was just wondering who decides where that money's going to go from development.
Okay.
That's my
So
question.
a good question. It goes into I'll just say a bucket, because instead of trying to say this development had this little impact here and this one over here, we try and look at the system as a whole. And then it's usually the projects that we're working on and that are current in the TIP. And so other than maybe the Costco projects, which they wouldn't have paid those, they paid their development fees. But I guess we just try and look at what system-wide are the right projects to plug in and not tie it to a specific development that is looking at the whole city.
Okay, I just have one more question then, John.
Yeah.
It's just because I do live kind of near Juniper Street. And so, yes, with that new building going in, I heard there was going to be a traffic signal. So that was always on your list.
Mm-hmm.
And so because they developed that new building, then they're paying for that traffic signal. And that's the traffic impact fee for that.
So a development, they can pay their traffic impact fee, or they can build one of our projects. And so on that one, the city actually, I assume you're talking about the Gilman
New
Lofts.
signal.
Yes,
The
Three Trails
the new
Crossing.
signal.
Yep. And
Yeah.
so that one, the city has a development agreement with the developer where, and I can't remember the amount, the city's buying some of the traffic signal equipment and the developer had hired a contractor to put in it, and it ended up being a partnership on that one.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see here. The next two ways are bonds. And with the bonds, there's two ways. The city council can issue its own bonds, which is what the city did for the Southeast 43rd traffic signal at Providence Point. The city had the bonding capacity to use the bonds to fund the construction of the new traffic signal and realigning the driveways. And the other alternative is to ask the voters to raise taxes to then issue bonds. And back in November of 2016, the city had a bond measure that did not pass that would have provided money for transportation projects. And then the final way is one that doesn't happen too often, although I've seen it done, is we can use the general fund for transportation projects, which is the main bucket the city has to spend money. And I'll pause for questions. I see Erica's got a question, and I'll see who else might have a question.
What's the difference between, I'm assuming that there's like a certain threshold that will go to voter issued versus councilmanic. Is that an assumption?
I think what I believe it is, and I'll double check to make sure I'm giving you right information. If the city, through its regular sources of revenue, can pay back the bonds, then the council can issue the bonds. But if the city needs a new source of revenue to pay for the bonds, then it needs to go to the voters. And so one option that's been talked about but not done is to ask the voters to raise the sales tax a little bit and then to use that money to pay back bonds. The one that we tried back in 2016 that failed, I want to say that was a property tax increase that the city had proposed.
Thank you.
Yeah, any other questions? Okay, Last time we talked about, for the Transportation Improvement Program, we have the projects that are currently underway that are either in design, maybe in construction, that we've been working on for a while, like the 2 Newport Way projects. And then there's the annual projects that we do every year, like the pavement management program. And then there's ones that we know we need to do, like take care of the Black Nugget retaining wall. And then the final 2 ones are, we've got long-term projects to look at and how we can program those. And then out of the Mobility Master Plan, an opportunity to look at the new priority projects, the ones that fit the criteria that we have in the Mobility Master Plan. For the projects that are underway, that will be in one form or another in the Transportation Improvement Plan, are the first one's the extra turn lanes at 12th and SR 900 near the Holiday Inn. That's the 3rd and final project of the Costco Development Agreement, and it'll add 2 left turn lanes. That way, if you're leaving Lowe's and you're heading to Tallis and you're turning left onto SR 900, there'd be 2 left turn lanes instead of 1. And then if you, after you realized you forgot something that you needed at Lowe's and you need to return to Lowe's, there's going to be a right turn lane to help you turn onto 12th. The Newport Way SR 900 to 54th Street project, that's one that's about almost 90% designed. It's a corridor project that will add pedestrian and bicycle facilities as well as intersection improvements along Newport Way between SR 900 and Southeast 54th Street. Very similar to that Newport project is the Newport Way Maple to Sunset project. The Newport Way Maple to Sunset project is one of our projects on the concurrency list for traffic impact fees, because it's going to add a second southbound lane between Maple, which is where Target's at, and about 900 feet south of Holly, near where Issaquah Valley Elementary is at. And it's also going to build 3 roundabouts, with the roundabouts at Juniper, Holly, and Dogwood. The Northwest Sammamish Road non-motorized project is a project that will build new non-motorized facilities from the neighborhood south of Lake Sammamish, sometimes referred to as South Cove, to the Lake Sammamish State Park. The Streetscape project is work that we're doing on Front Street and Alder in downtown to try and make for a more pedestrian, inviting environment where people can go there to mingle and to visit the shops and restaurants and enjoy that space. And then the final one is the Highlands traffic signal pole painting, which is to paint we've got some paint failure on the traffic signal poles up there. The annual projects, the ones that we work on basically as programs every single year. There's the Americans with Disability Act improvements that we do on an annual basis. Most often it's upgrading curb ramps or installing new pedestrian push buttons that have the audible feature and countdown heads for the pedestrians for crossing. The pavement management programs, the one that we use to take care of the pavement, where we'll repave the city streets, do things like fill in the cracks. The annual concrete maintenance program, that's a new one that the city has that will do things like grinding down trip hazards where the sidewalk joints have separated. It also could be used if we have some curb and gutter that's falling apart to fix that. And then the strategic small capital projects, that's a new project that the city has that came out of the strategic plan. And the strategic plan had a number, I want to say 6 goal areas, and one of the goal areas was mobility. And for the mobility goal, one of the 3 objectives was to build and make near-term connections and efficiencies. And so this is a little project to try and do this, where it might be filling in a gap of sidewalk, improving a crossing, and just trying to make the mobility system a little bit better, and look for small projects that have a big impact on the community. And was there another question?
Yeah, so I think it was in the MMP that I read that the pavement management program was underfunded to the extent that we would get shorter lifespans out of our roads. So I'm wondering if you could, comment on what we are thinking about to address that, and how much underfunded are we relative to our overall yearly spending in other transportation projects?
To answer the first question, I think our pavement, so when you pave a road, usually the life cycle is 20 years. Luckily, a lot of our streets have been lasting longer than 20 years. Our cycle for the pavement management program is approaching 70 years, to give you an impact on how underfunded it is. As for how underfunded it is compared to our other projects, I'm not sure I have a good answer for that.
I've got a quick answer.
Oh, yeah.
So in accordance with the pavement assessment that our operations staff did recently, the estimated amount that should be going towards our maintenance to meet our annual goals is to be about $1.4 million dedicated to the pavement management. And the city council recently upped our pavement management program to about $900,000, so we're getting closer to it. We're just kind of building on what we have to further better meet our goals.
Yeah, and I'll just add to it, because I actually live up in the city of Bothell, so out of curiosity, I wanted to compare Bothell's pavement management to Issaquah's, and I don't remember the exact numbers, but Bothell puts in a lot more money. Now, granted, Bothell's a little bit bigger, but it was more proportionate. But they have 3 sources, and the first source was really equivalent to what we have, that 900,000. And then the 2 other sources, they actually did a levy where they voted to raise taxes that goes towards pavement management. And the city of Bothell has been very active about seeking grants for pavement preservation, and that's something that Issaquah has been behind on, but we're changing it. So that's why we're applying for these grants with the NHS asset management. And then in 2022, there's another program that PSRC has where SPP funds could be used for pavement management. So we're, in addition to talking to the council about the need to try and get more funding, we're also trying to look for exterior funding to help with the program to try and get us on a better pavement cycle. Okay, any other questions? All right. So I mentioned last week, we also have a number of mandated responsibilities, and I view the annual projects in that way, like we need to take care of our pavement. We need to upgrade the public right-of-way to meet the needs of the disabilities community, so we do a lot of those things. But then there's other things like the Black Nugget wall behind Fred Meyer that'll need to be replaced, that I called it a mandated responsibility. It's just something that we need to take care of. There's a number of landslides that the city's currently monitoring. There's 2 right now. There's one on, I think it's Mountainside Drive, and another on Sunset Way near Sunset Court. We have a geotechnical engineer that we hired. It's monitoring it. That way we know if we need to do something that would be a capital improvement project to try and stabilize that landslide. And then We also have another landslide on Newport Way near King County's Precipice Trailhead that we actually got federal emergency funds, and that design will be getting started pretty soon, so that way we can repair that landslide. And then, as I mentioned earlier, there's the local bridge project program where if we have bridges that need to be repaired or replaced, that we need to take care of those, so that way we can have a safe mobility system. Talking now about the new priority projects. And for what we're trying to do, especially with the momentum of the Mobility Master Plan, these are things we really are excited for and want to do. However, there are some obstacles, and the first obstacle is just funding. That it's hard to fund get enough funding for the transportation needs. Before a pandemic, it's even harder now that we've had a pandemic, because like the Transportation Improvement Board, their funds come from gas tax. Gas tax is down because people aren't driving. And then what will happen with the sales tax data over the time for the city, real estate, what's going to happen with our REIT. If we have a recession, will there be less development and less traffic impact fees? So just, we don't have enough funding to do everything we want to do. We also don't have enough staff to do every project that we would like to do, which also I think ties into the funding. And then the third challenging thing is we have so many of the ongoing projects that when you balance out the staffing availability and the funding availability, it is hard to find places to program the new priority projects. The Mobility Master Plan priority list gave points to different criteria. And so the top evaluation criteria was to improve mobility within the city of Issaquah, which really makes sense when you read our city's strategic plan. The mobility goal is to make it easier for people who live, work, and play in Issaquah to get around town. So it's right, basically hitting at the heart of the mobility goal. It's also to prepare for growth, because we know growth is coming. More people will be moving to Issaquah, more people will be working in Issaquah, and we need to have a mobility system ready to meet this growth.
Hey, John, I think we have a question from Jerry.
Oh, sure, yeah. Go ahead.
Yes, it was mainly all those projects that you're working on now. So all of them are in basically design. So they, and you don't really have funding earmarked, correct, for construction for those projects? Or do you just have, because I guess every year the city gives you dollars to work on your plan, but then the big issue is when you find those construction dollars for those projects. Is that true? Do you understand what I'm saying? It
Yes,
seems like
yes, I do understand. And so I'll use the project that's going to be the next major one for construction, and that's the 12th and SR 900 project. The construction contract, I don't remember off the top of my head, the engineer's estimate was about $3.5 million for construction, give or take a little bit. And so in order to construct it, we need to have that money. And for the previous 2 years, we had applied for grants with the Transportation Improvement Board. In 2019, we were the first project not funded, and I left there saying, well, we're just getting started with design, no big deal, we can get it in 2020. But then 2020 came along and we still have a great project. However, the TIB has less funds. And so instead of awarding 3 projects to our criteria, they only awarded 2 to the growth and development criteria. And so here we are wanting to construct this project in 2022. The city does have enough funds in of traffic impact fees where the city could pay for its share. This is one that Costco is paying 48%. And so, yes, we can fund the city's 52%. However, that has an impact on other things we can do because we want to get the Newport Way Maple to Sunset project to construction for phase 1. And I really would like to try and save as much of the traffic impact fees for that project because that's a much larger project. And so, yes, it is a huge challenge getting these bigger projects to construction. And that's one of the reasons why when we did the strategic plan, the city wanted to have one of its objectives to find smaller projects that we could actually complete that could make a difference rather than trying to do more of these multi-million-dollar projects.
Okay, thanks. That's good.
Yeah. Any other questions before I continue? Okay. The next criteria is help connect with the region. And then Issaquah as a community is very high in protecting the natural environment. And so we award projects that help promote the environment as we rate them, and also have a category for investing wisely with the city's funds. This next slide is the new process for the transportation improvement program. And so we've got the 2021 committed projects. We have the new mobility master plan and priorities, and looking at evaluating those. And as we look at these projects, we got to look at what funding is available, because there may be something that we as a group want to do that we don't either have the funding or the staff capacity. Need to look at scheduling for the project, and of course, council input. I saw that there was a question, I think, from Erica.
Yeah, it was kind of on the last slide, but I think it's still relevant to this one. For connecting with the region for the process of building this MMP, were similar plans for like local surrounding cities consulted?
Stephen, I'll let you answer that one.
Yes, yeah, we did look at how other cities were using their points in terms of like how they evaluated the projects, and in terms of like preparing for growth or connecting with the region. It was primarily around the regional growth centers that are established in those neighboring cities. So Issaquah is one of those cities that has a regional growth center identified by PSRC, and so we are looking at the transit connections, in particular with any other corridor connections with that regional growth center. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. So as Stephen and I were getting ready for this meeting, we started looking at the projects that the mobility master plan rated and going with the top number of projects and categorizing them into near-term projects, mid-term projects, and long-term projects. That way we could help guide this conversation about what we want to try and do with the funding and the capacity and scheduling that we do have. As we have this conversation, the feedback that we're looking for is the prioritization of the network gaps, connectivity, safety, maintenance, how we go about incorporating equity, and the need for diversity on project type and size.
To clarify this slide a little bit, this is actually the board feedback we received since the last meeting to help with the conversation today.
Yeah, thank you for that one. And as we looked at the projects, for the top priority projects, we had 9 corridors for all modes of travel, 6 were trail projects, 4 were walk and bike projects, 4 were walkways, 6 bicycle projects, 1 for the automobile, and 0 transit projects are in the top priority right now. And most of the projects do have a safety component to them.
And to help explain why there's 0 transit projects on there is the city hasn't put together a transit plan. And because we wanted to separately have conversations around transit and light rail, we did incorporate transit discussions as part of the mobility master plan. So that's kind of the next step in the implementation of the master plan, is to talk more about transit, which is why it's on the board's work plan to start talking about that component of the system later this year.
Okay. Solutions that we're looking at are to move the network gap projects to the short-term capital project program. So that's that project that I had mentioned, the strategic small capital projects, where came out of the strategic plan that one of the solutions is to use that little bit of bucket money if we have a sidewalk gap or a bike gap, and to use this as an opportunity to look at social equity for this program. Another layer for evaluation in the transportation improvement program is the connectivity that we're trying to build, and we'll probably talk more and more about environmental stewardship and really trying to look after the natural environment here in Issaquah.
And the dates, oh, John, can you go back to the last slide?
Yeah.
To help explain the dates next to connectivity and environmental stewardship, it was this year we would add this layer evaluation as part of the TAP to show which projects are increasing connectivity in terms of, is it creating an island of a facility where it's not connected to something, or is it actually connecting to a trail system or another walkway to a neighborhood? The environmental stewardship is pushed to 2022 only because we want to make sure that we're coordinating with the newly assembled environmental board. And this year, one of their tasks is to put together a sustainability plan to look at criteria and evaluations for something like this. And so we want to be able to coordinate these discussions with the environmental board, likely later this year, and incorporate it into next year's TIP update.
Okay, I think I saw that. Micah, you have a question?
Yeah, so I just want to make sure I'm understanding this right. So network gaps, or addressing network gaps, and having an evaluation for connectivity are sort of the same thing, same goal, or are those different?
Yes, the same thing.
Okay.
And the question for you as members of the tab, what else should be considered?
And would it be helpful if we brought up the previous slide where we were showing kind of the board feedback?
Which one?
This one.
Okay, yep.
So in the feedback we received from several of the board members, just about everybody said safety, equity, and connectivity were important in terms of considering how we're going to be prioritizing projects or how we are evaluating the projects. And the same goes for having a balance of the type of projects that we that we're evaluating, but also the projects that we're designing. And then incorporation of equity, or at least and adding a racial equity lens and how we're looking at our projects as well. Does anyone have any comments or questions to add on to this feedback?
This is Cynthia. I think it'd be helpful for some of those people who contributed that feedback. I'm assuming you're talking about the requests that you had sent out to request feedback by email. I think it'd be good maybe to hear from some people who submitted. I was really curious what need diversity on project type and size meant. And I was just going to encourage people to talk a little more about what they had in mind with this feedback for the benefit of all of us.
This is Tom, and I can talk a little bit about the connectivity. Is that we were looking at connectivity, both for cars, but really for bikes and for walking between the different sections of town, as well as far as how do you connect being able to go to downtown to the shopping center area, and it's looking at connectivity where streets stop, and is there a way to that we can have streets continued or connect to provide alternate ways as opposed to just being on the main road, for example, on Gilman Boulevard or Newport, are the only that go all the way through from one town to the other town. At least in the Valley area.
This is Mike. I can talk on a couple of these. I did also mention, I think mine was probably more along the lines of network gaps, but same overall concept. That was why I asked about that. And that was, it's really about just, if we want to make sure that we're getting full value out of our investments, especially for alternative modes of transportation, if we have gaps, then that can prevent someone from actually using them. And so that's why I brought that up. I actually didn't mention safety. I completely agree with the priority. I just thought I had already seen it in there, and I fully support it. The diversity on project size and type is, we want to make sure that we are, at least in my opinion, continually delivering in something that can be more often achieved in smaller projects where we can have quick wins, sometimes people call it that, where we're always delivering something. But then we also have these longer term projects where there's a lot of visible construction, right? We want to show people that there is something happening, there is outcomes of all those, but then we have these longer term ones that have a larger overall improvement.
Anyone else want to elaborate on some of the comments that were submitted? So I was just going to say that I was having a little trouble. Having a little trouble figuring out how this feedback would be used or be different than the project evaluation criteria, because I feel like that's a similar exercise, but that was quantified. And I was just wondering exactly what kind of feedback and how you would use it vis-a-vis the project criteria, evaluation criteria.
Are you thinking of the difference between these and the other criteria that we had that had the priorities? I'm not sure. And are these relatively new compared to what we had talked about previously? The board feedback on these? The criteria that are shown on the sheet right now, are these relatively new, or are these still carry over from what we discussed a year or so ago?
This list is new. This is feedback that was received since the last board meeting.
Since the last board meeting, okay.
And Cynthia, to answer your question, the reason we asked for this additional feedback, in addition to the use of the project priorities, is because we want to make sure that everybody's kind of at the same level, and we're asking, did we get it right in terms of that project priority list? are we getting this list when you're looking through it? Right now, we can speak to most of these items in terms of are some of these projects doing this. One thing that we haven't really called out for each of the projects is their ability to fill the network gaps or build in connectivity into the network. That's something that I think John and I will have to take a look at in terms of adding an extra layer to the TIP process. But in terms of identifying projects that are improving safety, projects that incorporate maintenance or build-in maintenance or improvement of at least maintenance of the system, we can speak to, because that was part of kind of the development with the mobility master plan. The incorporation of equity is a little more difficult to speak to because the city doesn't have the level of detailed demographic information, as well as specific user information of the system that would allow us to speak to, is this benefiting all users or is it only benefiting a specific groups? And that's something that the city's working towards getting the data for. And then the need for diversity in project, we tried to kind of speak to that a little bit on the next slide in terms of identifying, specific projects to corridor wide versus trail versus walk. Yeah, this slide to help everyone visualize the balance that we're achieving. And I believe the board, the last time we spoke about this late last year, everyone felt that we did have that balance, but we didn't necessarily count it out like we're doing now. And so that's kind of the purpose of this discussion now is, are we achieving what we want? What's missing? What can we provide you for our next discussion?
Yeah, on the previous slide, it seemed like some of these items were things that we talked about when we developed the master plan originally, because we talked about if you can do an improvement on the street, can you also do the bike improvement, the sidewalk improvement, which is be part of the connectivity. So I thought we had covered some of these already. So in a way, if these are things that are new, they are all, not all, but there's some of them already are things that we had talked about. So they're kind of continuing part that's in the mobility master plan.
Yeah, one thought that I had on it is, because we are looking at the top projects from the mobility master plan, and that once we get to the top, for the most part, I believe that they're all good projects, and then it helps us to talk through some of the nuances because maybe one scores a few points higher than another one, but if we look at it from another, and just talking about, we might switch how we prioritize them, because to me, the scoring criteria does a good job of saying, this is a great group of projects, and then we can talk through for a variety of things, which ones we want to move forward.
Does that help answer your comment or question, Cynthia?
Sort of. I guess maybe that's just supposed to be a first pass and a guideline as opposed to an actual, just maybe one of, I feel like maybe I took it more literally when we were developing it, but I felt like we were searching for an objective way to prioritize, hence the term project prioritization. So it feels like we're then maybe adding another layer, or maybe that just gets us part of the way there, and then there's judgment. And I guess I can't help but think if they didn't land the way we wanted them to land, does that mean we need to reevaluate the project evaluation criteria? I don't know. I'm struggling with it a little bit.
No,
yeah,
that's
I don't think
that's
we want to reevaluate the criteria. If they land where they land based on what we think should be the criteria, then there's a reason they would land that way, unless I would think that would be why we have the criteria for that evaluation purpose, though.
And I'm not suggesting that we got it 100% right and it shouldn't be examined.
Okay.
But I think that, and I don't know, but I think, when you put together a multivariate criteria analysis and then you don't like the results, you have to ask yourself if you have to go back and revisit it, or are you just leaning towards a project for reasons that aren't, so I'm just trying to, I'm maybe being too literal, but I'm just trying to jive that, make that, so I'm trying to square with that.
see we have a comment from Christy.
Yeah.
Hi, Christy here. So this is only my second meeting, and I didn't get the opportunity to follow every meeting and discussion of the board's work last year. I think there's amazing work that was done. I think if I understand from our meeting last time that there were a few things that were maybe important, but didn't fall within the criteria. And so, for example, the prioritizing network gaps and create connectivity. I like the proposal of moving those potential projects to the short-term capital annual fund, because the thing is, residents and visitors and businesses, they need to have that reason to believe, but also those are important aspects of how our community connects and moves through the system. And so as we start to densify or things change or people are using our multimodal opportunities, those network gaps and connectivity for the community can happen incrementally. So I don't think that it's that the prioritization is wrong or that it missed something. I think it's just there's a lot of need and a catch up for the city. And so if there's a way to kind of look at how can you incrementally get those small things done, but at the same time, moving towards your larger goals. So I do like the proposal of moving those two perspective, smaller aspects of the network to network gaps and connectivity to the short-term funding. So that would be my 2 cents.
Thanks, Christy. There's a few of us that have done a lot of talking. I'm going to just take the liberty of, I'm really a big on promoting discussion here. So I'm going to just call on you guys if you don't mind, if we haven't heard from you. I don't think we heard from you, and I'm going to go into order on my screen. So Sujata and then Micah, tell me what you think. Tell us, not me. Tell us what you think.
I was going to say, I think actually when we start getting down to where the project lists are and evaluating them, I kind of agree with what Christy just said, where these are, the network gaps, the connectivity, they seem actually very, in a way, consistent with the metrics, kind of that weighted scorecard we had put together before. So I'm more just kind of interested in seeing, as we run projects through, sort of where they wind up, and then looking back to see if this feedback is consistent with that.
This is Micah. I did share about these. I wrote in a few of these and talked about the network connectivity, safety, and diversity in project size and type. But I'm happy to share more thoughts. I do have the same kind of question of what exactly this is then going to lead to. Are we actually going to turn this into criteria, like formal criteria? And what's the outcome of saying, well, here's what we would recommend that prioritization should be beyond what's already laid out in the NMP?
I can help answer that question before we move on. Cynthia.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's give Jerry and then Erica a chance to chew on it while you answer that question. How about?
Okay. To answer your question, what we're looking to do with this feedback is to add another layer of criteria on how we're evaluating the TIP. But it also could just be a review of the project criteria itself, likely that which we don't have the time for right now, but we can do that as part of our discussion of the TIP later this year. And so that would fully get incorporated into the TIP update into next year's process, because we'll have time. With that said, John, can you go to the solutions page really quick?
Yes.
We were trying to look at where we have the most flexibility to address, since everybody kind of called out the network apps as being a big priority, and that was a big topic of discussion in the mobility master plan development process. We were trying to find an easy solution right now where we can propose to move those gaps from, even though most of them ended up in the kind of top 30 list anyway, to identify a regular program where we're regularly, as Christy put it, incrementally kind of going at those network gaps, so that we're showing progress throughout the network, in all the community, without having to wait several years to do each of those projects. And so it just kind of be a regular small project program that we go through every year. And then on the adding the layer of evaluation, that's more of helping the tab gauge how well we're getting to those pieces with the TIP list.
Okay, how about Jerry? Do you have anything to add?
You know, right now, I really don't. I'm just curious to see what the projects are, and I probably would have something to add then, you know, the specific projects.
How about Erica, then Janie?
Yeah, I agree with the connectivity aspect. The gaps, see, that seems to fit in like right along with that. I think in my feedback to Stephen, this I think kind of falls in line with the like mix, like wanting a diversity of small and large projects, where I think some of my focus, and Stephen answered me in my email really well, was I guess taking advantage of funding where we can get it kind of the most, I guess, bang for our buck, or like wins. I think Micah put it earlier, like wins where we can get them. So yeah, that's my feedback.
This is Janie. I was looking through the project list and I started to wonder, there's a lot of projects that are ranked the same based on priorities, and wondering if there's a system in place for breaking ties to prioritize one project over the other when they are scored the same. And I don't know if that's for later in the year when we go to, revise the plan. But it might be a way for us to incorporate the feedback of, like, for equity specifically, I was thinking if we added one of those questions for each of the priorities lists, like how does this advance equity, or like kind of rank it that way. I don't know, those are just my thoughts.
What, if I could chime in, Cynthia, on responding to Janie's comment. One way to look at that top 30 priority list is they're all high priority lists. Forget the ranking. We're just trying to say this is how well they're addressing the guiding principles laid out in the mobility master plan. And so when we get to this level, even though one project, several projects will have the same ranking, it's really going to come down to what we do first based on funding availability, staff capacity, those obstacles that John kind of spoke to in terms of why certain projects aren't moving forward in the TIP right now.
Gotcha.
Let's see, David. Do you have anything to share? David W.
Was that for Dave Wagner?
Yes, it says David hand. Do you go by David or Dave or David? Because I see there's two Davids at least on my screen, besides not including David Mitchell. Do you go by Dave? Sorry. Wagner?
I think he's trying to unmute right now.
Ah. We'll come back to Mr. Wagner and we'll go to the other David.
I go by David, and I agree with the group. The prioritization makes sense, and just more looking forward to the specific projects and ranking.
How about you, Mr. Wagner? Any thoughts to share? Do you have your I can see you there. I think the only person we haven't heard from, besides him, would be Alec. Still trying to get to know everybody. So there's technology issues and the fact that more than half the group is new. So
I think Dave Wagner was able to unmute himself if you want to go back to him.
yeah, are you there? He's still showing mute on my screen, and I wonder if he's frozen.
I don't get the dots that come up on the screen as if the video is frozen on David Wagner's monitor.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Maybe move on, and then once he's able to unmute, then we can kind of go back to him.
Yeah, I don't think we heard from Alec either. And Alec has got no video or audio, so did I miss anyone else? I know we heard from plenty from me. All right. Well, it's certainly not critical that every single person weigh in at every single time, but I just want to get us in the habit of those of us that are observers. We want to hear from you too, and some of us tend to be people who have to talk to think, and we end up taking more time than our share. So I just kind of want to be in the habit of hearing from everybody. Now,
I think that's a good thing that you're doing, Cynthia, actually. So that's good.
Okay. David Wagner, are you back? Do you want to weigh in for a second? Okay, well, you jump in at any time if you want to cycle back. I did want to just make a comment that I would say that the criteria when we developed it, I don't think we were really thinking about the equity lens. And so that would be one area, that that I think is really, that this discussion is really useful for. And I do think that, we reserve the right to get smarter. So I didn't mean to suggest that the criteria was the end all be all. I also had another question. That's why wouldn't we go for the moving the network gaps into short-term capital project? What's the downside?
I'll go ahead, John, and then I'll chime in if I need to.
Sure. Well, because two downsides. One is it's only $100,000 and some change, so there's only so much we can do. And the other opportunity that we do have with this project is to do things that might increase efficiencies or maybe safety or improve a crossing. And so it's not enough money to go very far. And so we might find that we have a sidewalk gap that's 500 feet long, and maybe we only have money for 250 feet. But maybe we could combine it with another project too. But I think it's a great opportunity to look for small gaps to try and get them closed.
See, Christy has a question. Go ahead, Christy.
So question, I understand that there's a limited amount, not only in the city overall budget, but also in the capital annual plan for short-term projects. I'm wondering as when the city walks into its budgeting process this spring for 2022, I'm wondering, given transportation is one of the highest priorities for our citizens and also for our businesses, I'm wondering if there's a potential for TAB to do a letter to council requesting that perhaps for future budget years there be an incremental small increase in that particular fund to identify some of these issues that we see are beneficial to the community and wins, as we would call them. It's just a thought.
To answer Chrissy's question, the answer is yes. Yes, we can. Because the tab is contributing or giving feedback on the development of the transportation improvement plan, all this feedback for all these meetings are going to be relayed to the city council as they go into the city budget process. And so if the tab would like to formalize a letter and to send that to the city council as part of that process, we can do that. Cynthia, do you have any thoughts on that? I'll be working with you and Sujata to kind of put that together, and then at the next meeting or meeting after that, we would move to approve if needed.
So I think this is definitely a full board discussion, but my thoughts are that we might be more effective if I'm all for asking for more money, and I think that's a key part of getting money is being bold about asking for money. I 100% agree. But I feel like we're at a stage where maybe we might be more effective if we had a little more time together and we had a little more clarity around exactly like let's say we find that there's a whole bunch of small projects, but instead of 100,000, we have some data to show that it should really be 200 or 250,000, but we have a little more. I mean, maybe you guys have all the data and you just, and the staff feels like you'd be ready to make that request. But I feel like to be most effective from the tab, I feel like we need to have our feet under us a little bit more. That's my opinion, but that would be I think a decision for all of us as a group. So.
Yeah, and this is Sujata, and I would just also say, like, I think it would make our argument more compelling about the potential for asking more funding if we had a little bit of a better, I think, more clear about these are the types of projects we're looking for, or, we want to fund these 5 projects to get to X outcome, so we need X amount more money, or whatever it may be. But I think if we could be more specific about which projects we were asking for to kind of round out the story of the why, I think it could be more compelling and more useful to council in making that decision versus just sort of more of a general bucket. And I think looking at this agenda, we are getting to more specific. So maybe as we're moving toward that, it'll become more clear, and then it'll help us sort of, provide more detail into that kind of argument for why we would like for more funding.
That's a good point. Maybe it's a good time to do a time check. I'm curious. Yeah, I mean, I know the materials and the agenda items had several other documents. Are we going to be, was your intention to go through those?
If it's helpful to go through the project list, we can start to do that to help with this discussion.
I just want to make sure that you're getting from the tab what you need. And I know we've kind of balanced like time and resources and specificity and what kind of feedback that you're looking for, but I don't think I'm 100% sure exactly what level of feedback that you're looking for.
The two sides of what we were looking for is one was, are these solutions viable solutions that staff should look more into and potentially recommend as part of the next TIP? Or and the other part is with the project priority list, are we getting what the board is intending through the mobility master plan project priorities? Or do we need to take another look at the project priorities later this year?
I have a question. On the previous slide where we had the items that were brought up since the last tab meeting. No, next one, either back or forward. that one there for board feedback. Your guiding principles, some of these are on the guiding principles. So I think one of my questions is, do we want to change, and this might have been what Cynthia was mentioning, is 2019, we'd come up with the guiding principles. And if this board feedback, if we want to look at any of the guiding principles, modify them, add or change those. I mean, one of them that was on there was anticipate transformation, which is how technology is going to change the way we do travel and do things. And so some of these are the connectivity. I think we have that in there, but should we relook at some of the guiding principles also before we start looking at using that to prioritize projects?
And to respond to Tom really quick, the other aspect of that is, do we want to reevaluate the point allocation for the project priorities, which came from the guiding principles, the other level that we could look at too. And then I see that Micah has a question.
Yeah, so as far as Cynthia and Sujata, that was a great point you made, but then that made me think, so then what's the timeline for that as far as the budget process goes? Like, are we at a point where we have, 10 months before it matters whether we send something now or 10 months from now?
Well, the budget process would come in two steps. The first step is the really immediate one where we're going to be putting together the next 6-year capital improvement plan and transportation improvement program. And then that'll line out the blueprint for the next 6 years. And then the next step for the budget, because the CIP is not a budget, it's what we would like to do or what we plan to do. Then in the fall is when the council does the budget deliberations. And so when they look at the CIP, they can delay projects or they can move up projects. And for example, the project, the Front Street and Alder Streetscape was a project that we did not have programmed for 2021 in the CIP, and council decided to budget $300,000 towards that project for this year. And that came out of the budgeting process that took place last fall.
So though specifically, like if we were to ask for red letter saying, instead of $100,000, we've identified these projects, we recommend it be 200. That would be, we'd want to do that in time for fall to be sort of the next cycle.
To me, that would make sense. And I'm just going to think out loud, and because there's a lot that's unknown with the pandemic, that I have a feeling that the 6-year TIP will be pretty bare bones, and it will be conservative on estimating revenue sources for projects, and that strategically, depending on what happens between now and there with the city's revenue sources, might present a clearer picture where if the city was planning to spend this much money in 2022 and we find out revenues more, then there's opportunities. And so a letter might be more effective then than it would be now when we don't know much.
Cynthia, did we respond to your questions, or at least your comments on what the ask is kind of for tonight's discussion?
I guess my question is, are you getting what you need?
I am, and I believe John is too, because we were kind of before this meeting discussing on the type of feedback that we need to kind of keep moving forward on this process. And so I think what will happen in terms of next steps is that the next meeting will come back to the board specifically with I don't want to say a draft of what the TIP will look like, but kind of going in that direction of how the TIP may lay out for this year's proposal.
Thank you. And looks like Erica has a question.
Thanks. Cynthia, I don't know if this is more a question for you or the board in general, rather than staff, but I guess I'm just wondering like how much this, the question of funding is weighing in on what we're prioritizing, I guess, because I feel like we keep coming around to it. And so I'm just wondering like kind of what the loop and the cycle of that is.
Well, great projects, open hearts and wallets. I guess I'm not exactly sure. I mean, nothing in Washington State gets funded if it's not on a plan. So I mean, I think it's iterative, but I don't know exactly. Not precisely sure I understand your question. I think I see it more as a commentary, but maybe if I'm missing it, you can try again.
Yeah, no, I think actually you're more correct. Maybe it's just something I think our board should be keeping in mind of how much is it impacting our decision. What set me off was John's comment about, you know, like if the funding is more bare bones than like the TIB our TIP is going to be more bare bones, I guess.
One thing that I can say in terms of the concerns about funding, particularly for like small projects, is when John and I relay the TIP or transmit it to the City Council, part of our communication to them, and or at least in our staff report, is to communicate feedback from the board. And so part of what I'm probably, we haven't written it yet, but part of what I'm seeing to kind of go into that report is some of the board feedback is the board is feeling that connectivity and filling the network gaps is a high priority, something that was identified in the Mobility Master Plan, and to ask the City Council to consider a higher budget or some particular budget to go towards that program. And that could be part of our recommendation going to the City Council, and then they would discuss it beyond from that point. And then, on top of other recommendations or discussion items coming from the board.
That's super helpful. Thank you.
Jerry has a comment. Yeah.
Right. I was just continuing with what Erica was saying. So if we were going to provide recommendations for the Transportation Improvement Program, we kind of need to know per year what dollars we're dealing with, right? So as part of that, yeah, and this year and next year, and how that Black Nugget retaining wall is going to be taken care of, is that, or that's not part of the TIP? So we only are just dealing with the dollars that are available because you already have these annual maintenance programs, right? And so there might be limited dollars that we could identify projects with, correct? And so, but I would think if we were going to develop this TIP, yeah, we could have this prioritized list depending upon how many dollars are available. But in essence, we kind of need to have kind of a background. If it's 300,000 or something every year, I would have no idea what it is for the city of Issaquah for the transportation program. But it'd be really nice to be able to, if we were going to choose our priorities, it'd be really nice to know what that dollar limit is per year that we have available to work with. That's what I'm trying to say. I hope that makes sense.
Well, without getting into too many specifics, I'll go back to the slide with the funding sources. And because I think that'll be a good one to talk about. All right. So for the real estate exercise tax, I think that one we're not going to have a whole lot of extra money because we've got that's the funding for the most of the annual projects like the pavement management program, the concrete maintenance one, and also the match for the Newport Way SR 900 to 54th. And so that's a source that I think will be pretty much used to the max, especially not knowing REIT is very volatile, and so we don't want to overcommit to that because we might find we get a whole bunch of real estate exercise tax, or it might also just dry up. The traffic impact fees, I think that's a pretty healthy fund with a fairly consistent revenue coming in. However, because that one can only go towards the list of projects that are concurrency, and while I would like to have feedback on it, I have a strong recommendation for that because we have two projects that we're very committed to that have a high need for those. That's that traffic signal project near the Holiday Inn that I had mentioned, and the Newport Way Maple to Sunset project. I'm going to skip the bicycle and pedestrian mitigation fees and come back to that one. The school zone safety fund, that's one that it currently has a good balance, but we do have a lot of commitments from that one. And so I think we can pretty much count on the 100,000 from that one. And then the council might try and take up timely opportunities to use those funds to do traffic calming, which is something that we'll be talking to council about on November 9th. The potential for bonds, I think that's a future conversation. And at this point, I want to stay away from trying to use general funds. So then I skipped over that bicycle and pedestrian mitigation fee, because I think that's going to be the best opportunity to look for ways to build connections in the pedestrian and bicycle network. At the same time, we are limited to a list of projects that can use those. So we can't just say we want to build a new bike and pedestrian facility on Newport Way between SR 900 and Maple. I'm 90% sure that's not on the list, but I'd have to double check. But we need to make sure it's on the list. And so when Steve and I put together that spreadsheet that lists the top 30, I think I'll double check it, but I think I did highlight the projects that can use the bicycle and pedestrian mitigation fees, because I think as we're trying to look at the best use of our priorities, that we'll have the most opportunities to use that fund to try and accomplish some of the goals and priorities that we outlined in the mobility master plan.
So John, you're saying that the transportation improvement program, if there's a project already listed, you also list what the funding source, some funding source availabilities there are, right?
Right.
Okay, and I probably didn't look at it as careful enough.
Well, I guess that list is probably not as complete obvious to figure it out. So I'll say no, because I think a person would need to puzzle out which funding source. It probably could be more clear. I mean, that's something that we could do for next time, is to say, what are the best potential funding sources for these projects? That way it's really clear.
Yeah, this is Sujata. That was actually, I had a comment because I was wondering if that, and maybe that's what Stephen was sort of alluding to when he was talking about potentially coming back with a memo or something, that maybe in that or at the next meeting, what we could do is get some more clarity. So, it's almost like, line dancing or something. So on one side, you have sort of your list of funds, and on the other side, you sort of have your list of projects, and then you sort of match up your projects, your money, and it's a little bit messy in the middle, but I almost feel like because you've described your funds, and then you gave us big spreadsheets of projects in tiny font, and if there's a way where maybe for the next, and I think in general, we all sort of looked at that list of kind of priorities the board provided, and we all sort of nodded yes and said, yep, these look like good priorities. So in a way, if you could sort of, give us that sort of list of funding and list of projects and how they kind of line up, and maybe where, if there is any flexibility, we could, as a board, or if you guys are questioning, do we pick A or B, we as a board could maybe help weigh in on that. But it could sort of help narrow the discussion maybe, and feel less abstract.
Yeah, and I think, yes, I completely agree, and that's what we need to do before the next meeting. I also think that because it's mentioned doing it kind of iterative, where we would look at what we can actually do with what we have, and then if more funds became available, where would we want the priorities to kind of start looking to? And that way, if there is more funds, like if maybe there's some big commercial real estate sales and there's more REIT funds available, how would we want to look at prioritizing that?
Yeah, and so that way, if you have kind of the longer list, we can say, okay, we anticipate being able to fund these 3 projects, but we've prioritized 6 of them for each funding source. So in case one funding source winds up having more money, yay, we get to fund, the top 5. If another funding source winds up having a little less money, we know, okay, we had prioritized these 2 projects, but we only get to fund 1. It would kind of help, sort of as the funding source is becoming more is flexible or a little bit unknown. We understand that our projects, more or fewer projects, are going to get funded based on that. And or if all of a sudden we get giant amounts of federal funds, and then all of a sudden we can start reprogramming money and funding additional projects. Like, we just don't know. So that could be another alternative. So maybe, again, like trying to pair up and summarize a few list of projects by fund source and prioritize it, stack rank them. And that way that we can create that flexibility for you all going forward.
Stephen, you had a comment?
Yeah, I know I'm going to be committing myself and John to this, but what you're all asking for is actually the tip, what eventually gets delivered. So maybe what we can do, and John, I'll share my screen so I can help kind of help the group kind of visualize, or at least see what we could potentially try to put together next week, or for the next meeting is this is what the tip looks like. I mean, you have the full list of projects, the funding sources by year, or the cost going towards the project by year, total project cost. You also have the identification of specific projects, identified on where the funding source is coming from by year, and where they are in terms of like phase and cost. Is this what the group is? Would this help the group kind of see how the priority project lists out, or do you want to more specifically see based on the funding sources themselves?
I vote not creating extra work for staff.
Oh, I would have liked to seen how much of the funding source.
Well, can you do it in a?
But I'm an alternate, so I.
Can you do it in a simple way so it just doesn't create a ton of work? Like just, I don't know.
Oh, I've got a few ideas on how Steve and I can put something together and make it as something that could be useful. And
it may not be as crisp as this tip looks like, but at least we'll get it in a format that's readable and that we can kind of process together in discussion.
yeah, my thought is maybe a few lists where we might say these are in the top 30 of the MMP priority bike and pedestrian mitigation projects. I forget how many there were, and we could list them, what we think the cost would be and what they scored. And then projects that could use REAP funding, same thing. It would be what they scored, how much we think they would cost, and for those. And then ones that fit for different grant criteria, maybe we could say these are good ones for SDP, and so on. And so we would just help kind of simplify it. These are the potential buckets that we can pay for projects with. This is how the MMP scored it, and guide the conversation that way.
Sounds good. Do we want to do a time check, or did somebody have another? No, I don't see anybody else registering it for a comment, but
I think Tom was trying to say something, but he was muted at the time.
I'll go ahead and pass since we're time constraint.
it's okay. Because I'm kind of getting the impression that we might not get to the other agenda item, which was lower on the priority anyway. Let's go ahead and hear from Tom.
I was just curious, for the minute that the other thing was up there, I saw that the camera fund kept increasing every year. And so I didn't know if that was people are just not getting smarter. You think the camera would go down, funding would go down, or there are more students and buses that are getting tickets to there. So is there a general assumption with some of the funding that it generally is always going up? And I think it's just more of a comment that how we're predicting funds for projects that funds may not be there, but unless there's been a steady climb in ticket revenue since the cameras have been installed.
I'd have to check with finance. I don't know. I try and avoid that camera.
Yeah. Well, my daughter's been caught. No. Yeah, but I thought that was helpful as far as seeing the revenue and the sources where income's coming in from, as far as seeing where those. I'm not sure how that will help prioritize, because the priorities of the projects actually kind of depends more on the criteria, but it was good to see that for overall understanding for others as well.
And to respond to Cynthia, your time check, I mean, as Cynthia said, the second item on our agenda was primarily to help the board understand more about the mobility master plan. We'll easily add that to the agenda for the next meeting. So it's not, I want to respect everyone's time and stick to our schedule for tonight.
So where are we then? Are we ready to wrap this topic up, you think? I think you got some good discussion.
Yes, yeah, no, thank you, everybody. I think this is helpful. This will help me and John think about how to kind of keep moving forward on the tip. The main thing is I just wanted to make sure we had this discussion on the application of the project priorities as part of the tip process, because the city's never actually done this before. And so before we continue moving on, we want to make sure we're working with the board, kind of walking through those steps. And so I really appreciate all the feedback. Thank you.
So it looks like if we defer 4B, we're on to 5, which is 5A is the board work plan. Do you want to talk about that, Stephen?
I'm gonna turn it over to John.
Okay, give me just a minute, and I'm going to get the board work plan pulled up and share my screen.
As John's pulling that up, the main thing with the board work plan is not much is changing. We continue just to make small adjustments to the schedule for each month. The big agenda items that we'll be discussing after talking about the TIP is going to be primarily around pedestrian crossing guidelines and then street standards.
Yeah. All right, so I'll start here. We are in early February, so of course the TIP is really dominating the things that the board's working on, and then in March we've got an update to the streetscape plan. That was that project that we talked about earlier that council gave some extra money to this year to try and make Front Street a much more inviting area. So Stephen's been working with the downtown businesses on that one. And then the pedestrian crossing update, something we're really looking forward to talking to you guys about, because pedestrian crossings are a big safety concern for the city, and we've spent a lot of time working out what we believe are the best practices and wanted to get those moved forward, so we start utilizing them some more. And the to be determined racial equity training, that's something that we should know more about later. We're going to be updating our street standards this year in 3 different phases, and going forward we want to do it just once per year, and we want to do it every year. However, the city has not updated its street standards in 11 years, and it is well overdue. And that kind of takes us through the summer, or to the summer, and then in the summer we're going to start talking about the transit system and what we want from that. And then in the late summer, early fall, start talking about specifics of the projects that are in the transportation improvement program and talking about potential changes to the scopes of projects. And then later we got some traffic calming to talk about and reviewing the mobility master plan towards the end of the year. Any comments or questions?
Cynthia, at the last meeting, you had asked about the ability to have a specific racial equity training for the board specific to transportation. That's something that I'm looking into once we have a consultant on board, speak to them on timing, but also the design of that training session, because it'll be something that John and I will have to work through to put together for as kind of a conversation for the board, potentially in collaboration with the Human Services Commission or with other city staff.
Yeah, I think that seems to be something most people are pretty interested in, but understanding how we as a transportation advisory board can apply that to real on the ground, influence. I think the sort of the willingness is there, but none of us, I shouldn't say none of us, I'm sure many of us don't exactly know what that means specifically when we're looking at projects. And I think that there are probably some people that can help us with that. So thanks. Steve, do you have a staff report?
I think we have a question or comment from Dave Wagner.
Yeah, thanks. Let me apologize first. I've gone to blank screen twice during the middle of this meeting. Have no idea why, except other than maybe the wind is blowing over here a little bit, maybe power stopped. So I've been trying to play catch up the whole meeting. A couple things I'm concerned about. Looked at the priorities, and when you see that priority list, I see the plan. So I guess that's where you envision the funding to come in, those priorities. But what it doesn't give me is what that funding might be, whether it's dollars or cents, or where it comes from. And I get the priority because you wait out on using the priority items to get that score, but no dollars were figured into that score. And so I'm going, how can I make a decision on, anyway, you get my drift? So that's kind of where I'm at right now, and I've got to play catch up. And I apologize that I lost you twice. The good news is I was able to find you again. And so that's where I'm at right now on the whole picture. So I'll be playing catch up here as we go along.
Dave, I can connect with you after the meeting to schedule some time to help you kind of get through the board discussion, and then also I can send you the link for the video recording for the meeting as well.
And am I the only one that lost power? Everybody else has been good, right? And you've been talking right along, so I'm the only one who faded out? That scares me, because then you think, oh, did I have a blackout in the middle of all of this? No, I don't know what happened, but all I know is I was looking at a blank screen, nothing. There was no light, no nothing on the screen. So I had to go all the way out and come all the way back in twice to get back to where we are. So forgive me for playing catch up, but I'll get up with you. It's just going to take me a little while.
No problem, Dave. Cynthia, you were asking about a staff report?
Is that next on the agenda?
Yes. So just a very quick one. Next week, John and I are meeting with City Council for a study session next Tuesday night, where we're going to be talking about several transportation items. I'll send out a link once the agenda materials are available for that, for any of you that want to review the materials or listen in on the meeting. And that, unless John has anything else, that concludes our staff report.
So I think next is the chair report. I don't really have a report, but I wanted to say that there was a couple of us on the meeting that about 10 minutes prior. You know, I really look forward to when we all get together in person. It's always a lot of interesting hallway conversations before, and people don't mysteriously drop out of meetings when they're in person. So someday it will be safe to return to in-person meetings. In the meantime, I would encourage you to jump on 10 minutes early and just start little by little. We can get to know each other. I also want to just invite everyone to think about what they might need from staff. We will talk about the MMP, but if there's other things that you need from staff, I noticed there were a lot of questions tonight that were probably really helpful for people to get a sense of, you know, some of the background and funding sources and so forth. So think about what you might need. And then I also just have one housekeeping thing. My observation is that during the weeks when kids are out of school, attendance tends to drop for things like this. Is everybody planning on being there on February 18th? Just want to make sure we don't have a lot of people that are, I don't know where people will be going, but I just connected the dots and realized that that's during that Issaquah School District in winter break, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, that was one thing I was going to mention, was that we are planning on attempting to go skiing in Bend, but that, you know, I know usually we always wind up with meetings during Issaquah school breaks, and it can be a little challenging when you, especially, you know, if you do have school age kids at home. So I'm going to try to make it, but I am a little iffy for that meeting.
Is that going to be a consistent problem? And can we do anything about it, or do we just want to limp along?
If there's a large number of board members that are unable to attend due to school winter break or anything else, we can always talk about rescheduling or having a special meeting on a different day.
The good thing on the spring break, it's the second week of April, so that won't affect the third
Okay.
Thursday.
Yeah, I don't think there are too many. There's just this one. And then, summer's always a.
And since we moved our meeting from Monday to Thursday, there's significantly less holidays that impact our meeting date too.
That's all I had. Do we have a youth report?
Joseph wasn't able to attend tonight, and I believe Alec was having some microphone issues, so we may just have to get back to them at the next meeting.
The other thing is, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to go out of order, but I did notice, and as Stephen also noticed, there is a 206 phone number. And technically, we did actually have public comment. We offered public comment before it was on the agenda. So I don't know if the 206 caller is interested in making public comment, but Stephen, if I'm allowed to, I would like to invite that individual to make public comment if you so choose. One last call for public comment for the 206 number. You can unmute yourself and we invite you to make your public comment.
Is it *6 to unmute?
All right, well, if we're mistaken, oh, no, I think that individual unmuted themselves.
This is Steve Pereira. Don't know that I have a specific comment. I'm trying to work my way through a lot of this as well. I'm glad to see some type of a correlation between an item being what the priority criteria is and how that gets rated and how that fits in. So I just want to study that more to better understand how items get to the top of the priority list and maybe stay at the top of the priority list. So no specific comments at this point other than wanting to better understand, which is something I need to follow through like all of you have been doing. Thank you for your efforts.
All right, thank you. I need to print out the agenda because I keep having to go back and forth. So do we have any other business? We already talked about the next meeting.
The only thing I wanted to follow up on was the equity community convenings. If anybody was able to attend the one last week or the one earlier today, if there's any report out or follow up on that, this would be a good time to kind of give a quick update to the full board.
I see Jerry shaking her head. I kind of remember Jerry saying she might be interested, but I see her shaking her head. Yeah, okay. Okay. Well, if anyone...
And if no one was able to attend, I can send out the link to, I believe the meetings were recorded, so I'll send that out.
Thanks.
Hey, Stephen, as a part-time city employee, that's a requirement for us to attend those, so we'll probably get the very same thing that you're gonna send out. I do have, for the good of the order, just to make you all a little jealous, I get my second shot next Friday.
That's awesome. I am jealous. For sure. All right, well, I don't think we have to decide. I don't need a motion to adjourn. I think we just go ahead and adjourn. Okay, good. Well, thank you guys all. We'll see you next time. Thank you, Stephen and John. That was a good discussion, and I think we all appreciate each other. Thanks. Have a great evening.
Night, everyone.